This episode, we dive into how data co-ops and AI are reshaping the way companies access, validate, and use information. My guest, Brian Perks, founder and chief strategy officer of 5x5 Data, explains how democratizing access to high-quality data empowers startups and enterprises. We discuss the surprising fact that a live email address is now worth more than social security number on the dark web. How AI is both accelerating innovation and threatening publisher businesses, and why efficiency in targeting benefits not just marketers, but also consumers. Stay with us until the end, where Brian shares valuable lessons from his entrepreneurial journey and advice for anyone building in the fields of data or AI. I'm Vit Lyoshin, and this is an Hour of Innovation podcast. Drop your thoughts or questions in the comments. Let's start the conversation we can all learn from. And now, enjoy the podcast. Welcome, Brian, to the podcast. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So to kick off things, why don't we start with a little bit of your journey and background and the work that you do today?
Yeah. So I have been in the data space for about 20 years. I got into the space working for Jigsaw, which was acquired by Salesforce.com. So not a terrible way to get into an industry is through a successful exit. After that, I've worked for and founded and worked with a number of data and data-enabled platforms. I ran data acquisition and licensing partnerships for ZoomInfo. I ran publisher relationships and data acquisition at Bombora, and was the GM and the CRO at PIPL People, which is a data and identity company as well.
Okay, great. Well, I always like to have people who know about data because I like data myself. So that's always nice. I'm not sure if I can understand as much as you do, but still, we'll try.
I think you do a good job.
Imagine being able to create any app you need in just minutes without writing a single line of code. With AppForge Lab, that's exactly what you can do. Let's say you want to keep track of your expenses. All you have to do is grab an expense tracker template and you're ready to go in a few seconds. Now let's see how this app works. I'll add a new expense category called car loan. You can create as many categories as you want. Groceries, travel, dining, whatever fits your lifestyle. Next, I'll record a quick transaction. August payment, $500, simple as that. And when I go back to the dashboard, instantly my total spending updates, everything is organized, clear, and ready whenever I need it. And there's the best part. It's just one example. With AppForge Lab platform, you can build apps for any of your needs, from fitness tracker to project planner to habit builders. Sign up free today and start building the apps you actually need. So, how did you come up with 5x5 idea for this company? And also, what was the problem with how people were using data before that you're trying to solve now?
Yeah. You know, they always say necessity is the mother of invention. And my partner, Nick Weldon, and I, we initially had a shared experience graph, which is essentially a build out on a professional identity graph, who worked with who, trying to find the angles in which you build relationships, commonality. You know, we worked in the same company, or your prospect went to the same university you did. All of the ways that we kind of build instant rapport with people. And like any other platform, we needed B2B contact data to be able to fulfill that need. Well, the reality is post Jigsaw, there was a lot of consolidation. DiscoverOrg was buying a lot of companies. Ultimately, DiscoverOrg and ZoomInfo merged. In that consolidation, there was a lack of data. And what I did is I actually began kind of an informal exchange between 10 and then 20 and then 50 and 100 platforms, where we were essentially putting all of our data assets and exhaust data into one body of work, and then we just split the cost. And that actually became the foundation for our fractional processing cost. And really what we have done at 5x5 is we have been the anti-broker. We have disrupted the brokerage model for data. We saw the fall of brokerage in the real estate model to an extent last year. But really what we're doing here is providing a utility style foundational data asset and assets to platforms so that founders, product owners don't have to be in the data business to have a reliable, steadfast data supply chain. And it has been surprising even to me the impact this has and has had on the market, and just the availability of data for the consumer, the marketer, the fraud platform, insert your use case there across our customer base. But that's been our mission statement, is to just continue to provide that data and make it available, because it really makes sense.
Yeah. So this model is called work co-op. And I understand that this data is about contacts and the relationships of people and things like that for marketing, for example. Can you explain? Yeah. Can you explain a little bit more how this whole work co-op work?
Yeah. So our model is a participatory data warehouse, which has its basis in Sears and Roebuck, right? When the catalog vendors started saying, hey, your customers buy from catalogs, there are just a profile of people who buy from catalogs, and so let's share our circulation list. What we're doing is we're working with platforms that are email service providers, automation platforms, automated SDR, fraud platforms, publishers, customer data platforms, CRMs. Anywhere where data resides and is used, we are working with those platforms to collect the signal data, so the deliverability data, the bounce data from ESPs. We have validation signal on 250 million telephone numbers. And so really this data is not specifically a B2B asset. It is a comprehensive identity graph built by deterministic observational signal. And that's a long, fancy way for saying we are collecting data that tells the story of its accuracy. So we're getting the email and the deliverability vector. And we're not just getting this once, we're getting billions, hundreds of billions of signals a day, which we're aggregating. And it allows us to provide the technologies that build intent databases, that are doing IP to company linkage, consumer marketing, working with the mail houses that deliver your utility bills. And all of these things, when stitched together, become essentially the ultimate graph. And as we love to say here at 5x5, no one's data is as good as everyone's data across the board.
Yeah. So can you explain a little bit also how somebody can join this membership program or community, and how is it going step by step?
So our members are platforms, publishers, service providers across the board, and we make the process really easy. We have a membership agreement that you join, and then the data sets are delivered on a monthly basis, which is very noteworthy. Most data brokers want you to use an API and kind of limit your access to the data, and it's more of a quantitative analysis. How much of that data are you using? The 5x5 model is 5x5's data plus your data equals your data. And since there's no rev share, there's no royalty, you can use this data on behalf. It becomes an innovator's toolbox, because you see all of the things you can do in the conventional channels of digital activation, etc. But, in kind of getting back to your question, it is very easy to join. We put together a tremendous amount of resource for people who are even just thinking about building products. Because if you've ever been to a Home Depot or a Lowe's or a Menards, it's inspiring. You see all of these things and you're like, wow, I could build that. Or you get an idea for something else. And so we're hoping that taking people into our little innovation lab and data repository is going to spark the next, great product.
So I imagine, like you said, like startup who may not have any data yet, they still can join and start building that database for themselves, but also like kind of verify the data with your backend and share basically.
You're 100%. So our approach is that the most accurate way to validate data is to consume it. There are a lot of proxies for true consumption. If you're familiar with email, it's SMTP validation, right? If you've ever seen Anchorman, I like to say that SMTP validation is like the Sex Panther cologne. It works 30% of the time, 100% of the time. And the realities of that is that the change in the infrastructure, right? The change in the way that data, fraud prevention is actually impacting some of the traditional data collection vehicles is really, really interesting. And in fact, everyone's business runs on data. Really, it doesn't matter where in the ecosystem you are. I would make the argument that your business runs on data, your customers' data, your web traffic, your email subscriber list, your digital marketing campaign, all data.
Yeah. Are there any other use cases that people join in your community other than marketing, other than ads and things like that?
Yeah. So outside of some of the more like sales and marketing enabled fraud use cases like publishing, digital marketing, DMP, and audience, we do work extensively within fraud and identity. The predominant functions, I tell people that identity and data, are sisters. And essentially, if you're trying to confirm identity, the likely and the best place to go is just to bring in more data. Traditionally, in a fraud mitigation platform universe, you're using credit header data. It costs 8 to 12 cents every single time you hit that credit header data. So you better have something, valuable. And even when you get that data, it is remarkably missing some of the core elements like email, mobile phone data. Although mobile phone data is getting better in credit header data, it's expensive as well. What we're trying to do is bring all of the functions of that offline enrichment, but also we work with email service providers where we understand the footprint in which people engage in their email addresses. Those take place for most of us across 2 or 3 IP addresses that we're predominantly engaging, opening our email. As soon as someone is trying to reset a banking password or a brokerage, when you're outside of your footprint, you better hit the 2-factor button and let the real Brian Perks know that someone has compromised his email and has gone through and found his banking credential and is trying to reset his password and steal his money. So fraud and identity is a big space. Recruiting is another function. Human capital in general. Also insurance risk, profiles, movement. We're really touching all of it in a way that, our goal is to bring to these solutions additional data. So if we can enrich a transaction, provide, a little bit of additional value, there's a lot of residual value that is created specifically with performance marketing, acquisition marketing, or even fraud prevention and account setup, setting things up correctly and letting them run accordingly.
Okay, that's great. I understand. And then on the back end of your system, I guess, how do you make sure that the data is not fake or compromised in a way?
That's full circle. The data has to go full circle.
Okay.
If Brian is signing into his cell phone and then signing into his Wi-Fi and surfing the internet, using apps, installing apps, buying things, there should be confirmation signals where all of these things are intersecting that deterministically link like blockchain. Brian signed into this mobile advertising ID with this IP on this IP with this email. We're also seeing that email opening on that IP on a device that matches the operating system. And then we're seeing the cookies, the connected TVs, the tablets. all that are intersecting at common IPs. So really what we're doing with our graph is taking offline and online data and mapping the intersections between the offline world and the digital world. And then you can do whatever you want, because you can essentially go from a postal address to an IP for consumer targeting. You can specifically go to the business persona in that household or the professional personas in that household and target them, which is really exciting because it's opening up a whole universe of products, of channels, and engagement strategies that just didn't exist, 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, that's great. That's pretty detailed, and you can actually see if the same person, what they doing and how they going from one online resource to another. That's pretty interesting. And then also, what about concerns about like privacy, for example? Like how to make sure that certain information is kind of like not visible to everybody and things like that.
100%. So what we do at 5x5 is the products and the services that we're offering are essentially publicly available, right? We are not an FCRA governed entity, which means that we don't have your social security number. We don't have that kind of sensitive information. We don't have your bank account numbers. We're not a bank. And so we're not managing any of that kind of data. So the data that we have is publicly available through lots of sources for purchase. But what we do is on top of this, we are adding requirements and really raising awareness in the consumption side, such as the requirement that anytime you use our data management platform, those cookies must be read behind a consent management string. Anytime you are doing, an outreach to a consumer's mobile phone, you need to adhere to Telephone Consumer Protection Act. So what we're trying to do in our motion is a combination of education and enablement and the privacy management as much as we can do. I love to tell people, they'll ask me, well, is 5x5 CAN spam compliant? Well, the answer is yes, because outside of some of the foundational compilation things, you can't buy an opt-out list. Most of the requirements for privacy fall on the person who is utilizing that data. TCPA, CAN spam as examples. And so this is where the education and really being a source of information and education, because outside of us or going and trying to ask questions from ChatGPT, a lot of this becomes the realm of attorneys. And there's some great attorneys. I worked with some fantastic attorneys over the years. But what can also happen is an attorney is about risk mitigation and elimination, if possible. And sometimes the attorneys will say, "Oh, you should never do that because it's a zero risk." But unfortunately, anytime we're trying to make money or build products, there's always some inherent risk.
Yeah, well, you kind of got into this with spam. I was gonna ask, like some people have like multiple emails, sometimes maybe multiple phone numbers, right, or multiple computers, like you mentioned. Is it all somehow trackable that that's exactly the same person actually using all of that? Because I know I have like a couple of spam emails, and I sign up to services.
Yeah, what I tell people is, using a VPN or a proxy is one way in which you can kind of help to insulate your privacy. But the problem is there's a trade-off, right? 70% of us, myself included, like personal ads. I don't want to see an ad for women's tennis shoes, right? I want to see an ad for airplane parts, or I want to see, tractors, not necessarily what even my wife is interested. I'm not going to buy those products. 70% of us prefer that. And so as you start to do these things, as we've talked about, identity and data, are very closely related. And especially with the consumption of media, I might be very willing to subsidize or provide you a subscription to a magazine, right? That's essentially what every piece of programmatic advertising is you are paying someone else's way to consume media. Now, you're not necessarily interested in paying everyone's way. There's an audience that you're willing, though, to subsidize. And so if you are withholding, your identity and your data, it's more difficult for someone to pay your way. You hit the paywall very quickly. You see, as you're consuming media content, you get admiral because we don't know who you are. And if we don't know who we are, we don't know who wants to pay for, your ticket into the media show. So I think that there are lots of trade-offs that go into privacy, identity, and being tracked. But the reality is, you're very much in control. You can always clear your cookies. You can use VPNs and proxies. But the reality in terms of the risks that are out there, identity fraud is becoming more of an offline phenomenon than an online phenomenon outside of social engineering. Penetration testing, no one's hacking their way into these things. It's generally they've picked up the credentials in other places. And so a big part of what we're trying to do is, it's silly that the state of Oregon has mandated or made my mother's maiden name PII, right? Or a personally identifiable element. All I have to do is go look at Facebook and I can figure out what your mother's maiden name is, right? She's going to be in there. I'm going to see it. She probably has it in parentheses. Not hard to do. And so what we're also trying to do with this is awareness of things that the data is available. In fact, a hot live email address is, valid email address is worth more than your social security number on the dark web, right? So there's realities of this that I think the consumer becomes more attuned to, but we are trying to raise the awareness that the data is out there and that data is very bad at protecting other data. So let's, innovate beyond my mother's maiden name, passkey, all these other things that we can do to be more protective and better stewards of our own data. But this is a big part of it is that, the privacy battle is very much a team sport and you are your own best defense.
Yeah. I kind of like personalization myself. It's kind of natural evolution, right? We came from billboards and then TV and radio first, then TV, and now this precise targeting of people by what they do on an internet. And I guess now we're getting even less or more precision rather, but less specific, smaller group of people, but very precisely who are your customers. That's great for marketers. And actually, I am as a consumer, I get a lot of emails from all kinds of people asking me to do something, and I have no interest at all, and it's just waste of time.
So people ask me all the time, like, what data do you want to buy, Brian? Right? Because I mean, the simple things, I've seen it all. I always tell them I would like to buy a list of the people who would do business with me or who want to do business with me, because it offers the ultimate in efficacy, right? If I know who will buy and who won't, I know where not to waste my time. And so I think as we're looking at the sales and marketing realities of data, it's about efficiency. It's always about efficiency. And the ad personalization, we like to be presented with relevant functions. We buy those functions. It works. You can't argue with the numbers. But I do think that what is exciting is the efficacy makes products less expensive, right? We love to pick on wine bottles because something like 60% of that spend is actually going to marketing of the product, right? And like 20% goes to the bottle, right? The actual product is the least expensive aspect of what goes into the bottle. And so those efficiencies matter because the consumer ultimately pays the cost of any unnecessary marketing overhead that gets, tacked on to the end of the pricing. It's about driving efficiency in sales teams, marketing teams. If your TAM is 2,000 people versus 200,000 people, you're going to staff that entity very differently. And so I think a lot of what we are trying to do is on the consumer side, if I know you're not interested in something or have very likely zero interest in it, why waste my time and resources and your time and perception by marketing it to you just because I can? And in fact, a lot of the reality that we see within platforms that work for sales with sales and marketing in terms of deploying our data is the recognition like, wow, I have access to all of these 110 million consumer or 110 million B2B records, or I have access to this 250 million consumer database. I can email all these people. Great. But should you? Are they going to care? Do you know how difficult it is to email 1,000,000 people, right? Email used to be the top of the B2B funnel. What we have now seen is that funnel has constricted because email is now Google, Apple, Microsoft. You're not hitting a mail server in the basement anymore. You can't SMTP test that anymore. You have to have that data. You have to have that information. And it is all about building and having the most efficient segment of data, because even if the data is free, the activation's not.
I think that's kind of like this dating matching apps, right? You want to have exact precision and efficiency for marketers, so they contact right people, and consumers also want to be contacted by right companies, because like you said, I don't care about 90% of the products out there, but I may care something that some bald guy wants. So
I love, like, as you're starting to talk about, the data enables a better market ICP. And the tighter that ICP can be, you have a better response rate. Everybody loves that. So now all of your KPIs look better because the data is making everything perform better. And, it is amazing to me, when we're talking to platforms that work around lead generation, obviously a huge component of our customers are in that universe. We basically are powering website visitation as a platform. And what we see in these functions is, should you illuminate all of the companies that are coming to your website and the people in those organizations, or should you really limit it to the scope of the customers that you could, close? Because as an advisor and, from an investment standpoint, I can't tell you how many companies I work with that show me their pipeline, and I see companies like Google in there. And I'm like, you are a 10-person startup. Google is not going to buy from you because that is too risky. I don't care how amazing your product is. And it's like, yeah, but we could. I go, could, but what are the deals that you will win? Who is the simplest deal that you could close with the least amount of effort? That is what I want to see. I want to see that kind of targeting and that kind of intelligence, because, you can either invest your time in a high probability outcome, or you can invest your time in a lot of zero probability and you've still spent the same time.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Let's talk about AI. How does it help you in your product exactly?
I think that the biggest change that AI has made is it has allowed us to consume data faster. I was just speaking to one of our platform members, and they provide personalization for email marketing. And the beauty behind this approach is differentiated emails have a much higher deliverability rate, because those platforms are looking at the content. Is it the same message everybody is getting, or is this look like something that someone is actually going to get and care about? What we, ultimately kind of came out of that conversation is that this whole universe is shifting to a function of the efficiency, the targeting, the accuracy, and doing more with less. Because, like, we were just discussing, like, I have this huge list. I could send 100 emails. Who are the emails I should send to? And so we see a lot more consumption through the automation, through the AI. It is also, so it's driving, and driving demand, obviously. But one of the functions that no AI can really do is AI can't synthesize your phone number or my phone number or my email or the mechanisms for targeting me, digitally, but it can create all of the infrastructure that does all of the other aspects of that. And so that has been absolutely astounding to me. The platforms that have been created that allow you to send, messages on LinkedIn or on social at a level that just is absolutely mind-blowing reach and speed. That just didn't exist 4 years ago, a year ago. The biggest challenge, though, that I see with AI comes to my favorite thing. It's data license. Publishers make their content available under fair use so that you and I, as we do our searches on Google, we get an abstract and we see what that article is about. And if it's close enough to what we were searching for, we'll take a look at it. 10 years ago, 97% of Google's searches culminated with that person leaving Google. In fact, Sergey wanted to get you off of Google and into your content as soon as possible, right? That's the win.
Mm-hmm.
Today, the majority of the searches, about 97%, culminate in the user getting what they want from the automated response. So AI is answering the question. I don't care about the 10 links. I don't even care about what's below the fold, because I had a question and Perplexity, Gemini, Claude, use the AI chat GPT of your choice. You're going to get that answer and you're never going to visit the publisher site. And the problem is, this is the plight today of the publisher, because your AI engine did not know the answer. They referenced data coming from publishers. And that fair use function by which Google has used third-party content, the fourth tenet of fair use is, are you impacting or interrupting the ability of the owner of that content to monetize or other? And if it's a publisher who monetizes the website visitor, if you take that content and they never come, then you're no longer operating under fair use. And I'm not the first one, to be saying this, but what I can tell you is, if you look right now, you'll see that publishing and the traffic to publishers is down like 90%. And the reason for that is this AI answer function. And we all are dependent on human-generated journalistic content, and AI cannot create that. It can only find it and promote it. So we need to change the licensing model. And at the same time, I understand that, any kind of knowledge graph or a graph, if you change the distance of just one of those data points, you have to calculate the entire graph again, right? Because theoretically, the entire, distance, the model is going to have to be, retrained. And so there are real challenges here. I'm seeing the idea of creating, inference-based models to where the training data isn't necessarily provided, but we do need to start to protect the publishers. I saw Michael Prince, who's the CEO of Cloudflare. They're a content delivery network that basically sees the traffic of the internet, and they're sounding the alarm. In fact, they're starting to make and emphasize the pay-to-scrape model, where these platforms just pay the publishers for the content. But, unfortunately, the consideration here is how do you charge for something that completely usurps the value that the publisher would have gotten, right? And that's challenging. Gets right back into who's going to pay your way.
Yeah, it's reminding me of the Napster story, like distributing music for free. Basically, now they distributing this information for free without giving share, basically, to the source, whoever wrote this article. Even if it's wrong, even if it's old and outdated, it doesn't matter. Somebody put effort producing it, and you trained your model on it. So maybe, it's a challenge.
And the other function is, most consumers of AI do not understand the limitations of the platform every time they get behind the keyboard. Google, GPT, every one of the queries that we make is allotted a certain processing token allocation. And if you think about it, imagine that you are going to do a report and you're going to use 10 books to build your report. The challenge now is, if I'm going to build that same report, write that same report, and I'm going to have 100 sources in the function, that's a different amount of tokens. And now, as I'm trying to pull those 100 sources, I didn't have enough tokens in my search to fully pull all of that information in. And so now it'll make mistakes. I've seen it in my own work. It'll make privacy mistakes, because in the scope of the question, in trying to find the most relevant information, it can't reprocess all the information. And so it has to prioritize. And so all of the time, what you will see is you have to be an active participant. And I think that there are going to be a shepherd or a similar position in many of these companies. You need to have someone who has enough information to be able to look at this and say, yeah, that looks right, versus that next layer, because we've all been there, right? You ask that clarifying question and it'll come back, the AI will come back and say, oh yeah, I'm sorry, you're right. There is this additional function. And when you really understand why that happens and how it's happening, it is a little bit scary, because I think we start to think of this AI as being this kind of infinite force. But the reality is just like you're buying that can of Coca-Cola, and you're consuming that much of it, you're not getting the recipe, and you need to be aware of the fact that there can be gaps in the AI, and that the structure of the question matters in ensuring that the right referential data is considered. Otherwise, you get hallucinations and mistakes.
Right. I had somebody earlier on the podcast, we were discussing the difference between keyword searches in Google or any search engine for that matter versus the prompts now with AI. And it's a totally different approach how we use keywords before and all this indexing worked on the web versus AI and how it digs out those pieces of information. People need to be educated. We are just starting using this at this mass scale, and I think most people don't even understand, like you said, what's going on and what the difference is. Yeah.
The notion of a search engine still very, very viable in purchasing, right? Sourcing, and I think that's an area where Google and other engines get better. But would you rather have a search engine or an answer engine? And if it's a question of questions, then of course you want that answer engine. But I do think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity that comes from a more rigorous approach to things like the shopping, availability, digital functions, publishing, to make that better. How do you go beyond being just a link or the image that gets indexed? And those are the kinds of things that become experiential, right? All of us love Amazon because you can see what it looks like in your house. That's the kind of innovation that I think we're going to need to see. But you do have to be informed and aware if you're going to plug in a question to Perplexity or any other, that you're asking the question, the prompt, in a way in which it's accessing the relevant information. And asking a good question is the answer to many of life's challenges.
Yes, that's the hardest part, right? Asking the right thing. Yeah. So I want to go back a little bit to 5x5 and ask how are the companies using the data that you have to target their audiences? How does that process work?
So we are very diverse in the channels and things that we're working on, and so we spend a lot of our outreach dollars focused on founders, on product owners, on people building data models, whether it's in fraud or fraud and identity, programmatic advertising, because we think this data makes it better, right? The 3M solution, we don't make the tape, we make the tape stickier. We don't make the CD, we make it the sound better. We're basically taking that kind of an approach. And so one of the more interesting things that we do is, in order to help publishers sell inventory in and under the threat of a cookieless environment, we began the taxonomic categorization of content on an expanded IAB taxonomy. In English, we basically built out a reference data set that helps you understand what a particular news article is about. And so we spend a lot of our time reaching out to people who are consuming about either product development, data-enabled product services, activation, revenue generation. Those are all terms that definitely lead to the 5x5 universe. But we spend a lot of time also out, working with founders, with product owners, attending events, and ideating. right? I love to help. I love to come up with new things. We probably have 40 or 50 products that co-op members have, kind of taken our idea and run with, or our approach and run with. And it's just a function of observation against the data. We've seen the data and the direction that the data goes. And when you swim downstream with the data, your life gets very easy from a product standpoint. And so those are the things where we're investing our time and kind of helping from an innovation. But it's interesting as a founder myself, and having gone through the arcs that we all do. It's very interesting to me. The echo chamber that like a LinkedIn can be. We all get really excited about LinkedIn as a function, but unless you're a talking head, like myself, or the crew that really does a great job of that, Adam Robinson, has become kind of an all-star, content creator. You have to remember that audience is comprised of sales, marketing, and human resources, and a smattering of people who are in between jobs. And this is the reason that Microsoft purchased Xandr, was for the audience extension component. If you look in LinkedIn, you'll very quickly see that LinkedIn has a professional audience extension. And basically what that is the Xandr programmatic audience, and being able to reach people. And then a significant portion of their engagement is monthly active users, which are the email channels, right? This person is engaging with one or more of the emails. So I think as a founder, you both recognize that LinkedIn is you got to be there, you got to be on that, but you need to start thinking beyond it, because like all the social traffic is down. People are getting less value from those interactions, wholesale. And so we've got to all start thinking about what the next, function is for promoting our businesses, for telling the story, for pressure testing our theses. There's a missing link, right? We have Facebook, for keeping track of grandma and mom and dad. And we have Instagram to see what our friends are having for lunch. And we have LinkedIn for kind of like my professional landing page for me, but it's really never become a social network. So if you're watching or listening and you're thinking about, what's out there, we could benefit from a professional network development entity that is less focused on kind of this, pitching from the stage, and really more targeted around how can I help you with your business, build my, relationship graph and my trusted network of people. And LinkedIn never really became more than, your resume online.
Yeah. It's also very crowded with just people looking for jobs, not necessarily business owners, and also founders doing a lot of outreach. It's all sorts of things. It's kind of social media, but at the same time, it's like a professional group thingy. I don't know. It's very strange.
And if I want to talk to you about, what are you thinking about? What's your next idea? What of your theses are you trying to, right size or invalidate? We don't have that. We don't really have a place for founders, a place for, innovators, and even in this interaction, and you have a big reach, to people who think about these things like you and I do. It is interesting to me that it is still such a difficult kind of secretive way of finding other founders and making those connections. So there's an opportunity there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think all social media have become kind of outdated, and we can see that like less. So more older people stick with Facebook, and then now I think even like average age on TikTok is in 30s, which initially started with like teenagers, right?
It was like 50,
so
right?
It
was a Copa nightmare. But you're 100% correct. It's but I'm part of that, right? Like, if you've tried to hit me up on Facebook, I haven't logged into Facebook for like 4 or 5 years, and it becomes a function of the time and the value. And I think, we're going to see an evolution here we talk about doom scrolling. We talk about people getting shorter attention spans. I think that what is happening is people are getting better at recognizing the value in an interaction or in some sort of a preposition, whether it's an advertisement or a social post, and either saying, "Hey, I'm interested in that," or moving past it. And so I think the challenge is going to be in the creation of content that is both broad enough to really engage people, but also relative to what I'm actually trying to do today. Where you could get on LinkedIn or get on Facebook and spend 2 hours just scrolling through really everything, right? That's in your feed. Instagram, the same function. And I think that I've been the benefit of not investing a lot of that time and putting that time that people would normally spend doing that into my businesses.
Yeah. I also heard an idea lately that instead of focusing on too much on the like search engine optimization and social media, it's important still because it's still valid, but focusing more on how to get into LLMs. And there are even some resources how people can do certain things online to show up in LLMs, and then when somebody's searching for some business, your company will show up there. So I think that's also becoming kind of a trend. Yeah.
And it's all about things that do more, right? Like I've got a friend of mine is one of the founders of Cast Magic, and Cast Magic basically takes, in fact, I should hook you up with them, but they take these recordings and they help to create the blog posts that go along with that. And I think, platforms like Riverside and all that we all use in this universe are getting good at that. But I do think that, I remember, and I'm dating myself, when we started to see the combination printer, fax, scanner, copier. And I think that we're going to start seeing applications that are doing a lot more. And the other function is I think the applications don't necessarily have to have form anymore, right? We can all interact with our phones completely verbally, right? And that experience is 100 times better than it was 10 years ago, and continuing to get better. So I think we're going to start to see the universe of like dedicated application, dedicated functions start to merge. When you think about it, you've got email, you've got text, you've got your messaging and your apps, but they're all essentially a category in communications. Like, we have friends that we communicate with on Facebook. We got friends that we text. We got friends that we use this messaging app for. I think that we're starting to see a convergence in the simplification, because I don't want to have to go and check 9 different inboxes. Why not just have, these are your messages? And if I really care where it's coming from, then, but the AI in the phone is going to tell me, hey, these are work-related communications and it's work time, or this is your boss, or this is an important customer. So I think we're going to see those changes and those functions happen here very, very quickly. I think Apple or someone is going to buy Perplexity, to solve that problem, but it's coming.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's always fascinating talking about future and how what different people see in industry, and you see from your end, from your industry. It's always fascinating. But everybody's saying that everything goes to like more centralization, and channels will be the same, especially with AI changing everything, that it can just in a second pull it all from multiple places and show you the right thing. That's amazing. Yeah.
Some of the solutions that are really starting to get my attention are the interpretive aspects of like email inbox management, right? The things that are very difficult because they require that time. That segment, I think we all have a lot to learn from, because there's a lot of value created in saving people that time. I find myself spending, probably 5 or 6 hours a week, or more, just playing the email prioritization catch-up game, right? And so there's going to be people in the comments that say, you shouldn't be doing that, you should be using this. And I'll definitely read the comments, even though you're not supposed to read
it. Yeah. So let me ask you a couple of final questions about your entrepreneurial journey, because I think it's also important to learn from you. So when did you realize that it was the right time for you to build this company?
I think we really recognized that there was a shift. So when Jigsaw kind of set email free in the late 2000s, that was the birth of email automation, Marketo, right? No one had an email list to mail. It was the universe of brokerage. So we saw this kind of loosening of the grip on the data at the broker level. And then that little bit, kind of created all of these demand side services, and it led to more consolidation, right? Businesses buying other small data brokers and moving in that direction. And that was really the moment for me when I realized that the brokerage approach in any, model in any business, is really the antithesis of that innovation. When you're controlling the data and the availability of the data, you're stifling all of the innovation, all the observation, all the learning that can come from it. And so I think that the moment was probably, 2022 was the moment where we really realized that if you take the synergies of data, and when you're on the internet, it's data. You're consuming data. When you're on your telephone, it is data. We are consuming information. We are consuming that data. And your cell phone is on an unlimited plan. Your data is a flat rate every month. It keeps getting faster, better. And I didn't have to upgrade my service. It just kind of upgrades in the background. Your provider does that. And that was the point in which I really recognized that this was the moment for the brokerage model to, be displaced. And it has been an absolute amazing, ride for us, because there's products and services out there like all these website visitor and identity platforms. The only way you could do that 3 years ago was working with LiveRamp, and it's a 7-figure, investment. The data has to be onboarded, managed. Partners, innovators, that's beyond the realm. That's enterprise company functionality. Today, you've got 2-man startups that, do that. Adam Robinson is on LinkedIn. They're trying to run that business, the RB2B side, with 3 guys. Wouldn't have been possible, without the availability of the data and the automation, and of course the AI that goes with it. So I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that's great. And then what kind of advice can you give to somebody who's building something in area of data or AI and things like that?
So first and foremost, always remember that the data has no intrinsic value. It's all in the activation, right? It's like a shovel. You got to do something with it to get the value. Your customers are going to need more hand-holding than you think. What's apparent to you from your vantage point is not as apparent to everyone else. And you need to make sure you can explain that like you're talking to a 5-year-old. And I think the third thing that, I would put out there is you've got to make sure you surround yourself with an ecosystem of people who understand entrepreneurial thinking, that, not every thought and every idea and every aspect of that evolution is going to be, a $10 million winner. But in aggregate, you need those people around you to help you improve. You need those people around you to help you improve and add value to them. And so find that group of people that you can, work with. Iron sharpens iron, and really have that entrepreneurial, almost like a skunk works in your backyard.
Yeah. All right, Brian, thank you very much for your participation today and information and sharing what you built in there, and good luck to you. And I hope some people will go check it out and see what's there.
Perfect. Thank you again.
Thanks again. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in. I hope this conversation gave you fresh ideas and inspiration. If so, please share it with your friends and colleagues. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, and leave a quick comment. It helps more people discover this episode. See you next time.